All right, grade 10 history students, here is chapter 2A of Canada at War, a graphic history of World War II. So we're breaking this chapter into two chunks. So the first chunk we're going to look at is Hong Kong. So chapter 2, Outmatched Hong Kong, 1941. Japan's leaders wanted to control raw materials in other countries. Their first move was to invade China in 1932 and set up this region as a puppet empire for Japan to have control. Japan attacked China itself in 1937. In the brutal rape of Nanking, Japanese soldiers killed at least 200,000 civilians. In September 1940, Japan invaded French Indochina, i.e. Vietnam, and forced its government to give Japan control over Indochina's raw materials. Concerned about Japan's actions, U.S. President Roosevelt created an embargo on oil sales to Japan in July 1941. This reduced Japan's oil supplies by 93%. In August 1941, British General A.E. Grasset stopped in Ottawa on his way back to Britain from Hong Kong. Grasset had gone to school with General Harry Crager, Canada's top army commander. "Harry, we need help to defend Hong Kong. Can Canada send some troops over there? That would scare off the Japs. They can't beat white soldiers in a fight." When the Dominions of Office in Britain made a formal request for troops by telegram, Crager wanted to comply. Arthur Maine, the opposition leader, also put pressure on Prime Minister Stephen King. "Our airmen are fighting this war. Our sailors are fighting this war. Why aren't our soldiers fighting this war?" King felt he had no choice. Canada sent 2 infantry battalions and a brigade to HQ in Hong Kong. Hong Kong, November 16, 1941. The British, Canadian, and Indian troops outnumbered the Japanese 38th Division by nearly 3-1. War seemed unlikely. As Sea Force disembarked, Brigadier Lawson expected that he would have time to train his soldiers. The Canadians made their way through Kowloon to their barracks. While the Japanese forces prepared to attack, life went on as normal. Brigadier John Lawson, the senior Canadian officer, met with General C.M. Maltby, commander of all forces in Hong Kong. Maltby also commanded troops from the British Indian Army as well as the Hong Kong Volunteers. The Canadians were assigned to their posts on Hong Kong Island. Meanwhile, Lawson tried to gather intelligence about Japanese military movements from Maltby. Canada had no spies or intelligence sources of its own. December 8, 1941 was a quiet morning in the Canadian barracks. Then, Hong Kong was being attacked. Japanese bombers began their attack on Hong Kong's Air Force. 5 old airplanes. Hong Kong's air defenses were completely destroyed. On the mainland, the Japanese 38th Division attacked the Gin Drinkers Line, forcing civilians and troops to flee to Hong Kong Island. The Japanese demanded Hong Kong's surrender. Sir Mark Aitchison Young, Hong Kong's governor, refused to give up. On December 18th, the Japanese finally fought their way onto Hong Kong Island. The Royal Rifles of Canada and the Winnipeg Grenadiers were forced to retreat. The Grenadiers and the 38th Division fought fiercely. The Japanese surrendered Lawson's headquarters. Lawson sent a last message that he and his staff were going outside to fight it out. Lawson died so bravely that even the Japanese were impressed. They first covered him, then buried his body. Sergeant Major John Osborne tried to counterattack. Osborne picked up and threw several grenades back at the Japanese. Osborne shoved one of his soldiers aside to fall on a grenade and save his men by smothering the explosion with his body. Osborne was later awarded the Victoria Cross for bravery. Early on December 25th, the Japanese attacked St. Stephen's Hospital. The soldiers killed 2 doctors and 3 nurses, then bayoneted patients in their beds. Several nurses were raped repeatedly. On Christmas evening, Young and Maltby finally surrendered after 18 days of heroic resistance. For the 1,860 Canadians who surrendered, nearly 4 years of brutality and horror had begun. Forced to work in mines or in the docks in Hong Kong and Japan, and expected to live on 800 calories a day. 264 Canadian prisoners of war died before the end of the war in 1945. The survivors endured malnutrition and disease. They would suffer for the rest of their lives. King was forced to call a royal commission to investigate the Hong Kong mission. Chief Justice Sir Lyman Duff's report was not publicly released until 1948. The Duff report concluded that the Canadian government had acted properly in sending troops to Hong Kong. Despite the Duff report, King was not happy with the Canadian Army. But before King could make changes, the pressures of war forced Canadians into battle again. 8,000 kilometers from Hong Kong, in the town of Dieppe.